Good morning, welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jim Miller. I am president of the Friends of Fort Snelling, and I'm here to introduce two speakers for our brief program. The Friends of Fort Snelling was founded over 50 years ago to save the historic fort from highway construction. In the 1980s, our organization raised money for the Thomas Savage Visitor Center in Fort Snelling State Park. We are now planning for the bicentennial of the founding of Fort Snelling in 2020. We are here this morning to recognize the importance of Bdote Fort Snelling to the history of our region and nation. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to introduce our guests here this morning who have joined us. John Andrews, President of the Northern Star Council, Boy Scouts of America. Barbara Mitchell Howard, Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, Minnesota Historical Society. Keith Parker, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. John Anfitson, National Park Service Superintendent of Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And then Linda Boudreau, staff from U.S. Representative John Klein's office. Linda, thank you. And then many of our board members are here from the Friends of Fort Snelling. If you're here, please signify by raising your hand or waving. Thank you all. I'd like to mention two local individuals who serve on the National Trust. John Huss is a member of the National Trust Council, and I'm not sure he's this morning. His wife Ruth was going to come. Ruth, yeah, thank you so much. And then also Dick Nicholson. He's a member of the National Trust Council and also a member of the Friends of Fort Snelling Board of Directors. Dick's involvement with the National Trust and promotion of Bdote Fort Snelling is in no small part responsible for why we're here this morning. Dick, we appreciate all you do for this community. Thank you very much. Our first speaker is Stephanie Meeks, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Trust for Historic Preservation since July 2010. We are honored she joined us this morning from the headquarters of the National Trust in Washington, D.C. Before joining the National Trust, Stephanie served in several senior executive positions with the Nature Conservancy. She also currently serves as chair of the board of the Potomac Conservancy. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Meeks.
I was told to move the microphone because it will block my face. It's good to be with you, Jim. Thank you so much for your introduction. And Steve, thank you for all the work that's gone into pulling together our announcement this morning. We're very grateful for all the work that you have already done to preserve this really, the rich history and the complex history of this important place. And I want to add just a welcome to a couple of additional people. The National Trust has benefited for years from the advice and counsel of several people who serve in our advisors program. And I want to thank Charlene Rose, Benjamin Vanderkoy, Doug Gasick, and Will Stark for all the counsel and support they've provided us over the years. And I'd also like to add my thanks to the Nicholsons, whom have been encouraging the National Trust to learn more about Fort Snelling for a number of years and have supported our exploration of this work and are generously underwriting the National Trust engagement at Bdote Fort Snelling. So Dick and Nancy, thank you very much for everything that you do for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This place embodies so many important layers of history. Our location is a sacred place to the Dakota people, Bdote, where the waters come together. And it's believed that the first humans arrived here in the Twin Cities area 10,000 years ago. And it's therefore considered the birthplace of the Dakota people. That story has been unfolding for centuries before America even existed. And it's crucial to understanding who we are and how we came to be. After Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase opened up the heartland of this continent of the United States, Zebulon Pike explored the area for the Army and chose this site as the perfect home for a fort, this fort. Built in 1820, Fort Snelling was a key training ground for soldiers during the Civil War and a place where thousands of Minnesotans were inducted into both the First and Second World Wars. It was also briefly the home of Dred Scott. Living in a free state, he was a slave, but living in a free state, whose case for freedom went before the Supreme Court in 1857. And that decision, which was handed down in 1857, is one of the most infamous in the court's history, denied Dred Scott's rights, invalidated the Missouri Compromise, and accelerated the crisis between the North and the South. And Fort Snelling played a key role in the Dakota War when hundreds of Native Americans, most of them elderly, women, and children, were incarcerated on nearby Pike Island. All of these stories, including the difficult ones, need to be told. They're part of our national narrative. And at the National Trust, we're committed to mobilizing our 65 years of expertise and resources to help save the physical context of Fort Snelling, but also to make sure that these stories are interpreted fully and appropriately and remembered. So for all of these reasons, I'm very proud today to announce that Bdote Fort Snelling is a national treasure of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This is our signature initiative at the National Trust. It's a revolving portfolio of important places. There are 84 of them right now. But Bdote Fort Snelling is our first national treasure in the state of Minnesota. Our treasures include historic buildings, neighborhoods, communities, landscapes, engineering marvels, and from time to time, even a ship. We choose our treasures very carefully based on their national significance, the importance to the communities in which they reside, the opportunity to tell a deeper and richer and fuller narrative of the American people. And with this designation, it means that we believe Fort Snelling is of critical national significance, that we care deeply about its future, and that we'll be working arm in arm with all of you to create an even more vibrant future for it. In this particular case, Steve and everyone at the Minnesota Historical Society have just done superlative work to make historic Fort Snelling a popular tourist attraction. But we know that the 48 buildings that comprise the upper post have experienced decades of decline, and that's what we're setting out to try to reverse. We first named the upper post to our list of 11 most endangered places in 2006. And since that time, a lot of work has been done by the Friends of Fort Snelling and the Minnesota Historical Society and others to lay the groundwork for where we are today. We believe that through a unified vision and an empowered coalition working together, that all of Bdote Fort Snelling can once again be a thriving center of community life in the Twin Cities. We see this kind of transformation happening all over the country. Older buildings taking on new life and serving the current needs of their communities, their 21st century needs. It doesn't mean trapping them in amber. It means keeping them alive and thriving. With that in mind, I want to acknowledge some of the great work and the partnership that's already been breathing new life into this place. Steve and all of his colleagues at the Minnesota Historical Society are planning to redevelop Barracks Building 18 into an expanded visitor center to enhance site interpretation and accommodate a growing visitor population's needs. So Steve, thank you to you and the Society for your work. The Northern Star Council of Boy Scouts of America Base Camp will be building a new headquarters and leadership center on the upper post. John Andrews of the Northern Star Council is with us today. And John, thank you to you and all the Scouts for your dedication to this place. I believe that Andrew Michelson from Common Bond is here as well. Common Bond converted 5 buildings on the Upper Post into 58 units of affordable housing as a community for veterans and their families struggling with homelessness. So thank you, Andrew. We salute that work. And thanks also to Owen Metz and Russell Condis of Dominium, who are working, as Jim mentioned earlier, to redevelop 26 properties owned by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources into 190 additional units of affordable housing. So as you can see, this is very much a team effort, and we at the National Trust are honored and tremendously proud to be part of this dedicated team and working together towards a brighter and even brighter future for this treasured place. Through a $40,000 grant made possible by American Express through a partnership that we have with them that we call Partners in Preservation, we were able to help refurbish the historic clock of the Upper Post Administration Building, and that's going to be put back up when the building restoration is complete. So we're very, very enthusiastic about the work that is underway here, and as I said, we see this kind of transformation happening all over the country, which just gives us tremendous confidence that it's going to happen here as well. We are working just today in places like Fort Monroe, Virginia, which is undergoing a similar transformation as an active Army post to a civilian community. The VA complex in Milwaukee, where we're working with the Department of Veterans Affairs to restore several buildings in the historic core of that complex. And we believe that together, the coalition that exists, that the National Trust is now joining, has all the resources and the tools available to it to see the same thing happen in here. So with that in mind, not just the physical restoration of the place, we'll be working together to also promote acknowledgement, healing, and reconciliation in the use and interpretation of Bdote Fort Snelling. I mentioned earlier that this is a place with a very complex and difficult and challenging history, and I know that at times the Native American community have felt that their history has not been fully told and fully appreciated here. So we hope that here where the waters come together, that we will all be coming together as a community to make Bdote Fort Snelling a place of life and learning for the Twin Cities and for all of America. And with that, I say thank you to all of you for your support, for being here this morning, and just to say how grateful we are for the opportunity to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I want to introduce Steve Elliot, Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Minnesota Historical Society since 2011. Thanks. I think we got it. In his more than 40 years of experience in the field, he has served as President and CEO of the New York State Historical Association and as Vice President of Education and Chief Administration Officer for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. He has served on many museum, history, education, and civic boards, and is past chair of the American Association for State and Local History. Please join me in welcoming Steve Elliot.
Good morning, good morning. We're honored to be here today with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We thank the Trust for bringing a national spotlight to this important area by naming Bdote Fort Snelling a national treasure. May I ask all the National Trust staff people who are here to either stand or raise their hands? They have been terrific to work with. Could we thank them for their good work? Come on, keep your hands up. Come on, yeah. And I'd also like to recognize the Friends of Fort Snelling. Jim, you and all those, did you see all the hands went up when he said that? Talk about stalwarts, people you can count on. Friends of Fort Snelling, they're the friends you want to have on your side. And I just want to make sure we pause today and look around at where we are. This was an abandoned hippodrome. And think of the gumption that it took to take a bet on the adaptive reuse of this structure in an area that was just abandoned for decades. And look at this facility. It's not only a great facility, they do great programming here. We've had our leadership team out here with their programming. John, you and the council leadership, just to be commended for taking the risk to do this and for executing this so beautifully. Thank you for showing us how historic preservation works. And I'd like to salute Common Bond as well for their good work out here, and to recognize at the risk of omitting someone, and to thank the emeritus board members and executive council members of the Minnesota Historical Society who are with us today. Ben Vanderkoy, who overlaps with the National Trust. There's some overlap here. Ruth Huss, thank you for being here. Dick Nicholson, Grant Merritt, great to have you all here. These folks and their colleagues have struggled with the challenges at Fort Snelling for a long time. It's great to be here this morning, isn't it? The time is right to recognize the significance of this place, to broaden the stories told here, and to celebrate the roles of the many people who have lived, worked, and died here. That's why the Minnesota Historical Society is asking for state and private support to help revitalize historic Fort Snelling. And I'm enormously grateful to those who have stepped forward as advocates and with leadership gifts. The historic fort area includes the historic diamond, where the state's oldest building, the Round Tower, and its oldest house, the Commandant's House, have stood for nearly 200 years. It includes former cavalry barracks, which will become a modern visitor center to replace the existing deteriorating visitor center, and a number of other historic structures entrusted to our care. By investing in the historical infrastructure of Fort Snelling, we can better tell the rich stories of a diverse Minnesota. We can remind folks in this place of natural beauty that humans have been here for 10,000 years, that here some of the most consequential stories of American history unfold, of American Indians past and present, and Dakota homeland, of slavery, the Civil War, and the struggle for human rights, and the emergence of the United States as a global military power. This is a place that many people care deeply about, and that many more could. We are working closely with community partners to tell the many stories of historic Fort Snelling and to build support for our revitalization effort. We've invited community groups to tell us what they want to see in a re-envisioned historic Fort Snelling. And we'll continue to work closely with them as we develop our program. In addition, we're fortunate to be partners in the greater Fort Snelling area with the Joint Powers Authority, with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, our good friends at the National Park Service, at Hennepin County, the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Common Bond, and the Boy Scouts of America, who are graciously hosting us today. The future of the Fort Snelling area, including historic Fort Snelling, we can now say is bright. Located at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, this area has served as a gateway for centuries and will continue to attract people from across the nation and the globe to visit, to learn, to remember, and to heal. This is, without question, a national treasure and a great treasure for all of the people of Minnesota. We appreciate the support of the National Trust, and we're so glad that you all are with us this morning for their announcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your continued support and efforts. And one final speaker, Nicky Leingang from Congressman Ellison's office, will read a letter from Congressman Keith Ellison.
Hi there, everyone. As he mentioned, my name is Nicky Leingang. I'm a community representative for Congressman Keith Ellison, and I'm here to read a letter that he has written on behalf of this occasion. Dear friends, I would like to welcome the National Trust for Historic Preservation to Minnesota as you designate Fort Snelling as our country's newest national treasure. It is vital we preserve the full breadth of history and events that Fort Snelling has come to symbolize. This designation will ensure that future generations may learn from all that this site embodies. Fort Snelling's history spans many generations. The Dakota people hold this land sacred as the place of their creation, adjacent to an island named for the man who negotiated the treaty which ceded their sacred home. It was on this land 57 years later where over 1,700 innocent Dakota women and children were interned over a harsh winter following the U.S.-Dakota War. This fort was their last stop before being forcibly removed from the state. Fort Snelling was once the home of Rachel, a slave who in the 1830s sued for and was granted her freedom. It was also the home of Dred Scott, a man whom the Supreme Court refused to grant justice and freedom, even in the face of this precedent. The fort's name comes from its first commander, Josiah Snelling, a man who was a slave owner himself. Fort Snelling has much to continue to teach us, and I am glad that it can help tell the stories of so many Minnesotans. The stories surrounding Fort Snelling hold value for all. Protecting the future of the fort as a national treasure will serve as a monument to where we've been and how far we've come. I thank you for your work and for recognizing and helping preserve this critical site. Sincerely, Keith Ellison.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki, and please thank Congressman Ellison for his support. Our hosts this morning have been the Boy Scouts of America, Northern Star Council. Please join me in thanking their president, John Andrews. Our program this morning was organized by Mary Lou Seidel, from the Director from the National Trust out of Chicago. Mary Lou, are you still working? Thank you. Also, David Kelleher on my right here with the Minnesota Historical Society. Tom Fanisteel, site manager for Historic Fort Snelling, one of our tour guides this morning on the bus tour that follows. Also, Todd Adler, past president, board member of the Friends of Fort Snelling, and another tour guide. There will be a reception here in this building after the program. You are all welcome to join us. There will be a bus tour, as I mentioned, of Fort Snelling, both the upper post and lower post, right after this program. And I would like to conclude by thanking the National Trust for Historic Preservation for bestowing this designation and honor on Bdote Fort Snelling. Thank you very much.